Was it? It was Emily's first day on the bus.
Dog hair, big shocker.
Well, it's half-day kindergarten back
I don't
then.
have hair, so.
And so there was nobody hardly on the bus at all. Ann was still at school, coming home later. So.
Yeah, yes, it was kind of the benefit we had was that, you know, when they're dropping through the neighborhood, my kid would have found somebody else,
Yeah.
and gotten off and walked.
Right.
But-
No, the bus, and that neighborhood, that was it. Out there, back to Highway 61.
Yeah.
Down the road we went.
Yeah.
So who knows, I don't remember how far she was.
Yeah,
Her mother was just like,
she's in Forest Lake.
Mama. That's why I moved here. I mean, when sort of the world was crashing, Hugo sold the house. You know, I moved here, so all walking all the time. You know, that was the
We're going
best
to call the
decision I
meeting to
ever made.
order here.
Never had to drive to school.
Clerk, note those in attendance.
All will be noted, except Councilmember Edberg.
Wonderful. Will you please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance? I pledge allegiance to the flag
Of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, moving on to approval of the minutes. I trust everyone's had a chance to review the minutes of the regular city council meeting from August 10th. If there aren't any corrections, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
So moved.
With motion and a second, all those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Motion carries, the minutes pass. Moving on to minutes of the city council meeting work session on August 10th, 2022. Any corrections to those minutes? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion.
So moved.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor of approving the minutes say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries, the minutes are approved. Item 2C, minutes of the city council work session on August 16th. I'd entertain a motion to approve those.
So moved.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries, and those minutes are approved. Item 3, adoption of the agenda. Are there any additions or corrections to be made to the agenda? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to approve.
Move to approve. Second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor of adopting the agenda say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. We have an agenda. Moving on to item 4, consent agenda. I'd entertain a motion to approve that.
So moved.
Motion and a second. All those in favor of approving the consent agenda say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The consent agenda is adopted. Item 5, visitors and presentations, the quarterly sports center report. Ms. Crawford.
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. In your packet is the quarterly Sports Center report. We have been busy this past spring hosting numerous hockey camps, learn to skate programs, and the 29th annual skate show, as well as a regional youth hockey tournament. The Wiper Lake Area Hockey Association utilized the new hockey training center, or opened that rather, and is utilizing that. And I think I have a couple of slides of that there. So. There we have the dry land and the rapid shot equipment. It's very impressive what we have there at the sports center. I have one more slide, I think, on that. And then they also have kind of a mini rink on the left side. On the right side, we are in the process of installing solar panels on the roof of the sports center. So we've been busy working on that. Hopefully later this summer that should be complete. That is All Energy Concepts who is working on that project. Train Corporation has also been busy upgrading the mechanical, HVAC, roofing, lighting, and control systems at the sports center. So we should begin to see significant cost savings relatively soon with all of that. For a year-to-date analysis of the Sports Center, sales are down by approximately $28,000 compared to this same time in 2021, and that is the reason for that is. Everything was pushed back with COVID, so we saw a lot of revenue come in 2021, but I'm happy to report that our usage in 22 is consistent and slightly up compared to 2019 pre-COVID. So, and that is pretty consistent with many other communities in their sporting facilities. We're starting to see things be brought back to pre-COVID numbers, which is wonderful. We see a decrease. We've seen a slight decrease in the Boatworks Commons rentals. We've seen a very slight increase in Armory rentals. One thing to note is for the sports center under miscellaneous revenue, you'll see the miscellaneous there for 2021 year-to-date. We have about $26,000 there versus $573 there for 2021. That is our live barn subscription revenue, so that is much higher than we have seen in previous years. So I just wanted to call that out. And with that, I can stand for any questions for this report.
Thank you, Ms. Crawford. Council, any questions or comments on the Sports Center? All right. Thank you very much for the report. We will move on to item 6, public hearings, the Wellhead Protection Plan Amendment. Mr. Copy.
All right, I will kick it off. So the wellhead protection plan is required by Minnesota state rules. It's required to be updated by the municipalities who have wells every 10 years. It is done in 2 parts. So the first part is basically a modeling exercise that looks at the delineates the wellhead protection areas. That was completed a year ago and presented to council in December of 2021. So that first part has been completed. The second piece of this is called Part 2 and really focuses on goals and strategies to protect our wells. So really looks at the area that our wells draw from and how to protect our wells from any kind of contamination. So as part of this, a public hearing is required prior to submittal to the Minnesota Department of Health for their review and approval. So with us tonight is Mark Sherrill from SEH, the consultant that the city hired to complete Part 2 of the Wellhead Protection Plan. So he will give a brief presentation before we hold the public hearing and before council considers adopting the Wellhead Protection Plan and directing staff to submit to the Department of Health. So with that, I have Mark Sherrill from SEH.
Thanks for the introduction, and hi, Mayor, and hi, Council. Like you said, I'm here to talk about the Wellhead Protection Plan. It's a program that was established in 1986, amendment to the Safe Drinking Water Act by the EPA. In Minnesota, it's operated out of the Source Water Protection Agency. That's a unit in the MDH. It's broken up into 2 parts, Part 1 and Part 2. Each part is required to be updated every 10 years to account for any changes or any new information that's been learned or established or new modeling techniques for the Part 1. City of White Bear Lake had their last plan done in 2012, and that was their first plan. So this is their first amendment. The Part 1 was completed in 2021 by WSP, and I'm with SDH. I'm a geologist, and we completed with the city the Part 2. So just to go over some key terms here, you can see there on the map, that is kind of the end product of the Part 1. That's the modeling effort that determined where the groundwater source that goes to your wells is coming from. The red line shows the 1-year path line. That's where the water in the source water aquifer is coming to the wells. The blue line, kind of that extends farther out from the wells, is the 10-year travel line. And then the yellow line, kind of everywhere that's not shaded in black, that's your drinking water supply management area. And that's kind of defined as the jurisdictional boundary of the wellhead protection area. And then within that drinking water supply management area, there's different vulnerabilities, and we'll see that map on the next slide there. So you can see different colors there, kind of a green, a yellow, and a red. That kind of are the 3 different vulnerabilities that you can have for drinking water supply management area. A low vulnerability, you can see there on the map, is kind of directly over your wells. That means the vertical recharge time to the source water aquifer is anywhere from a period of decades to a century. The yellow area means that the vertical recharge time to the source water aquifer is anywhere from years to several decades. And then you have just a small portion of high vulnerability, which is anywhere from a period of weeks to years. So with that being established in the Part 1, the Part 2 plan really establishes the potential contaminant sources that may be a threat to the source water aquifer. So that's really, we're looking at things like Minnesota Pollution Control Agency items such as tanks, above ground tanks, below ground tanks, even things like private wells are potential contaminant sources, just because those are kind of conduits down into the source water aquifer. So all of those things are required to be scoped inside of the MDH has a scoping notice, and that kind of says, these are all the things that you should include in your Part 2 well protection plan and look at and inventory to see if they're threats to the city. Another big portion of the plan is the inner wellhead management zone survey, and that's an even more stringent inventory, and that's a 200-foot setback of potential contaminant sources from the wells. And so City of White Bear Lake is doing a great job. You know, their inner wellhead management zone surveys have met all the setbacks. There are some things that are almost always within the setbacks, such as utilities. And, you know, those are just good to note that they're there and not necessarily a contaminant source, but are potential contaminant sources, if that makes sense. So the plan then has components in it, like a contingency strategy, which is covered by a water supply plan that was approved. And then it has implementation strategies, and that's the steps that the city will take to implement the wellhead protection plan over the next 10 years. Those things include, for the most part, public education. And so there's a lot of grant funding that can go into helping to address potential contaminant sources. The one that the MDH pushes a lot, they do a lot of grant funding for sealing of private wells. And so if there's unused or abandoned well that a private citizen within the drinking water supply management area would like to seal, that you can apply for grant funding with MDH. So that's one example of one of the management strategies. So if something like that comes up, you can apply for grant funding and help get that sealed.
So that was a brief presentation as far as what the Part 2 covers. We'd be happy to answer any questions before you move into a public hearing.
Council, any questions? Councilmember Walsh.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question on wells. We have very few left in the city, right? And we kind of know where those are. Is there any left that would fit in this definition or need a grant? Or
There's always some that are out there. Most often, resident and seal up unused wells. Most of them are currently used or at least known about, but definitely something that we can look at as we move forward with this, to look at or notifying those permittees. Oftentimes, some of the older wells aren't even known about. They can just be something found on the property. They weren't, and I'm not sure the year, but they weren't always registered prior to a certain year. So a lot of old farm wells, old wells like that were not registered. So as we find them, we do, on any of our projects, we definitely do seal those. But definitely something that we can look into with, you know, as we move forward with these strategies, to contact owners of wells to see if they are interested in sealing those wells and moving forward with these strategies.
thanks.
Mr. Mayor?
Member Jones.
Thank you. A follow-up to that question, I mean, could we make that a requirement if they're not being used, as far as?
Councilmember Jones, I would look towards our city attorney. I'm not sure that that's a legal, I think it's more of a legal question, but I don't know if our attorney has anything to add to that.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor and council members. Honestly, I've never looked into that. I'm a little concerned that area of regulation is, you know, so closely regulated by the Department of Health that we would have to make sure that there isn't some preemption issue there that would prohibit us from getting into that. I mean, I know they already have, you know, all sorts of requirements regarding well closures and that sort of thing. So if that's something you'd like to look at, we certainly can, but I don't have a ready
Question,
answer for
I mean,
you.
I guess if MDH thinks an uncapped well randomly within the city is not a safety hazard, so I'd kind of direct that question at Mr. Sherrill.
I think, you know, all cities across the state have wells, and a lot of people like to keep their wells for irrigation. So I know the MDH likes to advocate best management practices of wells. I don't think they, I can't speak for the MDH, but I think they're supportive of people who want to keep their wells, but if there are unused abandoned wells that are potential contaminant sources, they prefer people to seal those.
And that's really what I'm kind of getting at too. I mean, if we had a large geographic area that was near the lake that was 100% a community on all wells, does that present any threats to our drinking water?
Wells for low, moderate, and high are, if they reach the source water aquifer, are considered a potential contaminant source if they're improperly used. So,
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilmember Hughes.
I have some dumb questions. Okay, so you had that color chart up there with the green, yellow, and the red. Why is that one, what makes that area high vulnerability? What's going on there?
yeah. So I didn't do the part one, but I've done part ones in the past. So essentially, what that's saying is there's material that an aquifer is made up of porous material, basically. So you can think of like a really common one as a sandstone. So you can think that there's pore spaces between that, and that's where you're getting your water from. And most water is moving kind of laterally towards the wells within that aquifer that's buried, 300 to 700 feet deep. And above that, where your aquifer is, there's less porous material called confining layers, actually. And so areas where there's red, they've determined that there's less or not as sufficient confining layers, essentially. So the water generally moves anywhere, from 10 times slower than it does horizontally. So that, when there's more confining layers, it moves even slower. So all of that green area that you see around the public water supply wells, I think there's really thick confining layers. So anything from the surface actually has a really hard time getting down to where you're actually pulling your wells from. So.
And that's what that is referring to, is how fast it takes, or how long it takes groundwater literally on the ground to get into.
Yeah. What they say is, water that is created from percolation, from rain, or anything that's on the surface, that's how long it takes to get down to the wells that are, or not the wells, sorry, the source water aquifer, which is, 300 to 700 feet deep.
And what you guys were looking at is just that time, right? Or are you looking at also the amount of water in that aquifer that supplies the water to the area?
The well protection plan is really an inventory of everything that for protecting the source water aquifer. So it accounts for both water quality and quantity. So the source water aquifer is for the, yeah.
So what are you seeing in the quantity? Is there enough?
That's a very tricky question, actually, and there's been a lot of work by the USGS, by the Met Council, and by the DNR, and so the plan kind of looks at the work that has been done by others, and so I think it's still an ongoing kind of task that's being worked on by the DNR.
So you guys look to their information in building it, you don't create your own?
Exactly, especially in the part two, is we just look at existing information.
And have you looked at that stuff?
I have, yeah.
I'm pretty stupid about that stuff. Does it kind of say there isn't, or there is enough water?
That's a very tricky question, but I think, if you look at places across the country, they don't have nearly as much groundwater resources as Minnesota does, especially within the Twin Cities Basin. We're really blessed with a lot of water in comparison with other places around the country.
That's a good non-answer.
I'll add one thing to that. So this plan really looks at contamination, not volume of water. We look towards, the folks that Mr. Sherrill had mentioned, the DNR, Met Council, to look at some of the volume questions. So this plan did not look at the volume side of our aquifer. So.
And do we need to? In terms of this?
In a broader question, yes. We leave that more up to the.
We also use their data?
Correct. The regional planning, it's such a huge effort to do that modeling. No one city can do it alone. So we really look at those agencies, Met Council, Minnesota Department of Natural Resources, to do that.
If there were a huge problem that was known right now, would that be flagged under this? Would that currently be flagged?
As far as a volume standpoint, no. This is really looking at the contamination aspect of our wells. So if something were to happen, for example, like the red area that we're talking about, we would not, from a zoning standpoint, put a gas station there because it's a high contamination, high vulnerability. So those are the kind of things that this side of the plan looks at, not necessarily how much water we're pumping. That's under our appropriations permit, which is done through the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for letting me do that.
Council, any more questions? Councilman Brangstrom.
Point out that red area is in Washington County, it's not in our, if you can see the map.
Yep.
Yeah, I believe it's in short view, actually, in city limits.
That's way over, Washington County line is right here.
Or that's in,
That's all Washington County.
Yeah,
yeah, I think,
that's a good point.
yep.
All right.
Thank you, Mayor. Just very quickly, to get back to the question that was asked. So the statute on a well sealing talks about a well or boring needs to be sealed if it's contaminated or may contribute to the spread of contamination. It was essentially attempted to be sealed, but it wasn't sealed properly. And endangers groundwater quality. That's another one that has to be, or if it's not in use and does not have a maintenance permit. And then all of the sealing has to be done by a licensed person. So.
Anything else from the council on this at this time? All right. Thank you, Mr. Sherrill. Appreciate it. At this time, I will open it up for a public hearing. I have no names on my list, but if anybody wants to speak to this issue, now is your opportunity. State your name and address. Anybody at all? Seeing none, I will close the public hearing and bring it back to the council. Council, do we have any more discussion on this? We have a resolution before us approving the second phase of the plan. What do we want to do?
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. The resolution passes. All right. Item 7, unfinished business, nothing scheduled. Item 8, new business, nothing scheduled. And 9, discussion, nothing scheduled, which brings us to communications from the city manager. Ms. Crawford, what do you have for us?
Thank you, Mayor, members of the council. Just one event to share with you. We have a credentialed CPR class at the South Fire Station Tuesday, September 6th from 5 to 8 p.m. Registration is required. It is a first-come, first-served basis, and there is a $60 fee for that, of course, and the link is on your screen if anybody wants to apply for that. So, otherwise, events are slowing down as we get back to school time and gear up for fall. That's all I have tonight.
Anyone on the council have questions or comments for Ms. Crawford? Seeing none, I'd entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
We're adjourned.
And then lengthen our meeting.
I was trying to talk so fast I was stuck.